All right, so you wanted to take a deep dive into capitalism versus socialism.
Yeah.
And you brought along an interesting source to unpack.
Okay.
A PragerU video.
Interesting.
Before we really jump in, though, it's worth kind of noting that PragerU leans towards presenting a conservative viewpoint.
Right.
So knowing that, let's unpack what they had to say.
Sure. Context is key, right?
Yeah.
This video jumps right into reframing a common perception. Instead of the typical capitalism equals greed narrative, it kind of flips the script.
Okay.
It argues that capitalism actually stems from the need to meet other people's needs. It kind of paints this picture of individuals striving to succeed, not out of pure self-interest, but to provide valuable goods and services that others want.
Okay, so they're saying that, like, good old self-interest actually ends up benefiting everyone.
Yeah.
I can kind of see that.
Yeah.
But it seems a bit idealistic, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like, what about situations where the profit motive leads to, like, cutting corners or exploiting people?
That's a great question, and it's one that critics of pure capitalism often raise.
Yeah.
Think about industries like healthcare or education.
Yeah.
You know, essential needs that everyone should have access to.
Right.
If we leave those solely to market forces, wouldn't those who can't afford the best care or education be left behind?
That's true.
Is that really meeting everyone's needs?
Good point.
Yeah.
And that actually ties into the next part of the video where they use Amazon as an example.
Okay.
They say that businesses like Amazon thrive because they're giving consumers what they want. Choice, convenience, all that jazz.
Okay.
But does that really hold up for everything?
Well, the Amazon analogy is a compelling one, especially in today's world of online shopping.
Right.
But think about a situation where you need a life-saving medication.
Yeah.
Are you really in a position to shop around for the best deal?
That's a good point.
Or are you at the mercy of pharmaceutical companies and insurance providers who might prioritize profit over your well-being?
Right. Yeah. It's like comparing buying a book on Amazon
To something as essential as healthcare.
Right.
Like the market dynamics are just different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the video's comparison of voting with dollars in capitalism versus government control in socialism comes in. They argue that in a free market, you, the consumer, have the power to decide which businesses succeed by choosing where to spend your money.
Okay.
But in a socialist system, they suggest that the government makes those decisions for you, leading to limited choices and potential shortages.
Okay, so they're making a case for like individual freedom and consumer power.
Right.
Versus government control.
Right.
But doesn't that oversimplify things a bit?
It does.
I mean, we've all seen how markets can fail to meet essential needs.
Yeah.
And how unregulated capitalism can lead to problems like monopolies and environmental damage.
Yeah, you're hitting on a key point here.
Yeah.
Economic systems aren't black and white.
Right.
They exist on a spectrum.
Yeah.
The videos seems to present capitalism and socialism as these two opposing extremes.
Yeah.
But the reality is far more nuanced. So maybe it's not about choosing one or the other,
Right.
but about finding the right balance,
Right.
the right mix of market forces and government intervention to create a system that works for everyone.
Precisely.
And that's where the discussion about European countries like Denmark comes in.
Yeah.
The video is very quick to point out that these nations aren't truly socialist,
Yeah.
but rather capitalists with strong social safety nets.
Right.
They argue that Denmark's prime minister even explicitly stated that his country is a market economy.
Uh-huh.
But isn't there more to it than that?
Yeah.
I mean, these countries have universal health care,
Yes.
free education,
Uh-huh.
and a much stronger social safety net than we do in the U.S.
Right.
It seems like there are some fundamental differences in their approach,
Absolutely.
even if they operate within a broadly capitalist framework.
The term socialism gets thrown around a lot, and it's important to distinguish between different models.
Right.
Western European countries, particularly those in Scandinavia, have a strong tradition of social democracy. Yeah.
Which emphasizes social responsibility and a more equitable distribution of wealth.
Okay.
They achieve this through higher levels of taxation and robust social programs,
Okay.
leading to a system that some argue combines the best aspects of both capitalism and socialism.
Okay, so we're starting to see that there's a whole spectrum of economic systems out there,
Yeah.
not just pure capitalism or pure socialism.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting for me.
It is. And this is where understanding those nuances can help us evaluate claims like the one the video makes about the U.S. economic boom post-2017.
Okay.
They attribute this boon to lower taxes and deregulation,
Yeah.
policies they frame as inherently capitalist.
Right. Yeah, but Isn't it a bit simplistic to attribute a complex economic event like a boom solely to those factors?
Yeah.
Weren't there other things going on at the time that could have contributed both positive and negative?
Right. Economic cause and effect is rarely that straightforward.
Yeah.
Lower taxes and deregulation might stimulate economic activity in some sectors.
Yeah, but they can also have unintended consequences.
Right.
Like exacerbating income inequality or neglecting environmental protection.
Yeah.
A comprehensive analysis needs to consider a broader range of factors.
I'm starting to see that understanding this debate requires looking beyond simplistic labels.
Right.
And digging into the nuances of different economic models and their real-world impacts.
You got it.
This is good stuff.
And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. It's not about ideology.
Okay.
It's about understanding the tools we have at our disposal to create a society that meets everyone's needs while fostering innovation and opportunity.
Speaking of ideology, the video gets a bit pointed when they talk about young people who favor socialism.
Yeah.
They claim that these young folks are actually hurting themselves.
Right.
And those less fortunate by advocating for policies that will stifle economic growth.
Okay.
That seems like a pretty harsh generalization, don't you think?
Definitely. It's important to remember that every generation faces its own unique challenges.
Yeah.
And has its own perspective on economic systems.
Right.
Many young people today are grappling with issues like student loan debt, stagnant wages, and climate change.
Yeah.
Issues they feel haven't been adequately addressed by traditional capitalist models.
It's like they're being told to just accept the status quo.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't seem to be working for them.
Exactly.
No wonder they're looking for alternatives.
And it's worth remembering that the values driving different economic philosophies can vary significantly.
Yeah.
For some, individual freedom and the pursuit of wealth are paramount. For others, social justice, environmental sustainability, and collective well-being are more important.
No.
These values inform how people view the role of government, the distribution of wealth, and the purpose of economic activity itself.
Okay, so maybe it's less about one generation being right or wrong.
Right.
And more about understanding the different values and experiences that shape their perspectives on economic systems.
That's a great way to put it. And it brings us to the final, and perhaps most provocative claim in the video.
Okay.
The idea that capitalism leads to economic democracy, while socialism inevitably ends in economic dictatorship.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Isn't that painting things with a pretty broad brush?
It is.
I mean, we've seen examples of capitalist societies with significant restrictions on economic freedom.
Yes.
And socialist-leaning countries with relatively high levels of personal liberty. It doesn't seem like a simple equation.
You're right to be skeptical. The video seems to be pushing a narrative that oversimplifies a complex issue.
Right.
The relationship between economic and political systems is far more nuanced than they suggest.
So maybe it's not as simple as choosing between economic freedom and government control.
Right.
Perhaps there's room for systems that prioritize both individual liberty and social responsibility.
Yeah.
For models that blend elements of both capitalism and socialism in ways that work for a specific society and its values.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we need to be exploring.
Yeah.
It's not about clinging to rigid ideologies, but about looking at the evidence, learning from different experiences, and experimenting with new approaches to create a more just equitable and sustainable world.
All right, so we've unpacked a lot here.
Yeah.
But I'm already feeling like this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
We've got to dive deeper.
We do.
Where should we head to next?
Well, the video brought up a few examples. We could take a closer look at, like, Venezuela's economic crisis.
Okay.
Which they present as a cautionary tale about the dangers of socialism.
Right.
But is it really that straightforward? You're right. Venezuela is often held up as the poster child for the failures of socialism.
Yeah.
But as with most things in economics, the reality is far more complicated than a simple label.
Yeah. The video seems to present it as a simple equation.
Yeah.
Socialism equals economic collapse.
Right.
But I believe there's more to this story.
There always is. While Venezuela's economic struggles are undeniable, attributing them solely to socialism ignores a whole host of other factors.
Like what?
Think about things like political corruption, mismanagement of resources, and their heavy reliance on oil exports.
Okay.
When global oil prices plummeted, their economy took a massive hit.
Oh, wow.
It's like putting all your eggs in one basket and then dropping the basket.
So it's not as simple as saying socialism caused the crisis.
No.
It's about understanding the interplay of economic policies, political decisions, and external factors.
Right.
I'm starting to see how this whole debate requires looking beyond simplistic narratives.
Yeah.
And really understand the context.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of considering diverse perspectives.
No.
If we only rely on sources that present a one-sided view, we're likely to miss crucial pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
It's like trying to navigate a city using a map that only shows half the streets.
So in a way, the PragerU video is giving us a map.
Yeah.
But it might be missing some key landmarks and routes.
Right.
It's up to us to fill in the gaps and find our own way through the complexities of this debate.
Precisely. And that's where critical thinking comes in. We need to be able to evaluate different arguments, weigh the evidence, and form our own conclusions based on a nuanced understanding of the issues.
The video also makes a big deal about how socialist policies supposedly disincentivize hard work and innovation.
Right.
They claim that people are less likely to strive for success if they know the government will provide for their needs. But is that really how human motivation works?
Wow.
I mean, people do all sorts of things without expecting a financial reward.
Right.
Volunteer work, creative pursuits, even just helping a neighbor.
You're right. Human motivation is far more complex than a simple equation of work equals money.
Yeah.
While financial incentives certainly play a role, there's also intrinsic motivation. The drive to create, contribute, and make a difference in the world.
Right. People start businesses, invent new technologies, and write books not just for the money. But because they're passionate about their ideas and want to share them with the world, it seems like the video might be reducing human nature to a rather simplistic calculation.
And it's worth considering the potential downsides of a purely incentive-driven system. If we're solely focused on maximizing our own financial gain, what happens to values like cooperation, empathy, and a sense of shared responsibility for the common good?
It's like we're all competing against each other.
Yeah.
Instead of working together to solve problems and build a better future.
That's a valid concern, and it highlights the need to think about the ethical and social dimensions of different economic models. It's not just about generating wealth. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to flourish and where we prioritize values that go beyond pure economic gain.
So we've established that the video might be oversimplifying some things.
Right.
But what about their central argument? They seem to be saying that capitalism, with its emphasis on individual freedom and consumer choice, is inherently more democratic than socialism.
Yeah.
But does that hold up when we look at the real world?
That's where things get really interesting. The video seems to equate economic freedom with political freedom. Arguing that capitalism empowers individuals, while socialism leads to government control. But it's not that black and white.
I mean, we've seen examples of capitalist societies with significant restrictions on individual liberties.
Yes.
And socialist-leaning countries with relatively high levels of personal freedom. Doesn't seem like there's a simple equation here.
Exactly. The relationship between economic and political systems is far more complex than the video suggests. And it's worth considering alternative models. For example, some argue that democratic socialism, which aims to achieve greater economic equality within a democratic framework, offers a path towards both individual liberty and social justice.
So it's less about capitalism versus socialism.
Right.
And more about finding the right balance between individual freedom, collective responsibility, and economic well-being.
Right.
And that balance might look different depending on the specific context of a given society.
Precisely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What works for one country might not work for another. The key is to engage in thoughtful dialogue, consider a range of perspectives, and critically evaluate the potential consequences of different economic approaches.
The video praises the consumer power of capitalism, arguing that we vote with our dollars and shape the market through our choices. But honestly, it sometimes feels like I'm just choosing between different brands of the same product, all owned by giant corporations. Is consumer power really that effective in shaping the economy?
That's a crucial point. The concept of consumer sovereignty assumes a level playing field, where all individuals have equal power to influence the market. However, in reality, wealth and corporate influence can significantly distort this power dynamic.
So while consumers do have some choice,
Yeah.
it's often within a framework shaped by powerful interests.
Right.
It's like choosing between different flavors of ice cream.
Right.
But someone else gets to decide what flavors were offered in the first place.
Exactly. And this raises questions about the limitations of consumer power in addressing issues like monopolies, corporate lobbying, and the concentration of wealth.
It also makes me wonder about the video's claim that capitalism leads to economic democracy.
Mm-hmm.
If a small group of individuals and corporations hold disproportionate power, how democratic is the system really?
That's a fundamental question that goes beyond the scope of this particular video.
Right.
But it highlights the need for ongoing critical analysis and debate about the relationship between economic power, political influence, and democratic ideals.
It seems like this whole debate isn't just about economic systems.
Right.
It's about power.
Yes.
Who has it, how it's distributed, and how it's used.
You've hit the nail on the head. And that's why this topic is so relevant and important to discuss. It's not just about abstract economic theories.
Right.
It's about the kind of society we want to live in and the values we prioritize.
Okay, so we've talked about the video's take on socialist Europe and the situation in Venezuela.
Right.
They also touched on the U.S. economy, particularly the boom after 2017.
Yeah.
They credit that to lower taxes and deregulation.
Right.
Which they frame as classic capitalist policies.
Mm-hmm.
But is that the whole story?
That's where we have to be careful about attributing complex economic events to single causes.
Yeah.
While lower taxes and deregulation can certainly stimulate economic activity, they can also have downsides.
Like what?
Well, think about the environment.
Okay.
Without regulations, some businesses might prioritize profit over environmental protection.
Right.
Leading to pollution and long-term damage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or consider worker safety.
Okay.
If regulations are loosened, some companies might cut corners to save money.
Yeah.
Putting their employees at risk.
So it's not just about economic growth.
Right.
It's about creating a system that's sustainable, equitable, and protects the well-being of both people and the planet.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between economic freedom and responsible stewardship.
That makes sense. It's like anything else in life. Too much of one thing can be a bad thing.
Right.
Even if it seems good at first.
Exactly. And that's why these discussions are so important.
Yeah.
We need to weigh the potential costs and benefits, consider the long-term consequences, and strive for policies that promote both economic prosperity and social well-being.
I'm noticing a recurring theme here.
What's that?
Nuance.
Yeah.
It seems like this whole capitalism versus socialism debate is often framed in overly simplistic terms.
It is.
But the reality is far more complex.
You're absolutely right. It's not about choosing one rigid ideology over another.
Right.
It's about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches.
Okay.
The trade-offs involved and the importance of adapting to changing circumstances.
So it's less about finding the perfect system and more about constantly evaluating, adjusting, and striving for a better balance.
Exactly. And that requires open minds, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
The video seems to imply that people who rely on government assistance are somehow less deserving or motivated than those who don't.
Yeah.
But that feels like a pretty unfair judgment.
Definitely. It's crucial to remember that everyone's situation is different.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't make assumptions about people's character based on their economic circumstances.
Right. People might need help due to job loss, disability, health issues, family emergencies.
Right.
Any number of things that are often beyond their control. It's not simply a matter of laziness or a lack of motivation.
And let's not forget that many people who receive government assistance are working. But their wages are simply not enough to cover their basic needs.
Yeah, that's true.
The rising cost of living has made it increasingly difficult for people to make ends meet.
Right.
Even with full-time employment.
So it's not about judging people. It's about understanding the systemic factors that contribute to economic hardship.
Right.
And creating a society where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Exactly. And that's where social safety nets and programs that support those in need become so important.
Another point the video made was about the supposed dangers of government overreach in socialist systems.
Right.
They basically said it leads to economic dictatorship.
Okay.
But hasn't history shown us that both capitalist and socialist systems are susceptible to corruption and authoritarianism?
You're right. It's too simplistic to say that one system inevitably leads to tyranny, while another guarantees freedom.
Right.
History is full of examples of both capitalist and socialist countries that have experienced varying degrees of freedom and repression.
So it's not about the inherent nature of the system itself.
Right.
It's about how it's implemented.
Yeah.
The checks and balances in place. And the values of the people in power.
Precisely. And it highlights the need for vigilance, active citizenship, and a commitment to democratic principles, regardless of the economic system in place.
The video talks a lot about individual responsibility in a capitalist society.
Yeah.
They frame it as this idea that you reap what you sow, that success is solely a result of hard work and individual effort.
Okay.
But doesn't that ignore the role of luck, circumstance, and the opportunities you're born into?
That's an important point. While individual initiative and hard work are certainly important, they don't tell the whole story.
Right.
Factors like inherited wealth, social networks, and access to quality education can significantly influence a person's life trajectory.
It's like some people are starting the race a mile ahead of everyone else.
Right.
Just by virtue of their circumstances.
Yeah,
it's not a level playing field.
And that's where the concept of social responsibility comes in.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we have a collective obligation to create a society where everyone has a fair shot at success.
Right.
Regardless of their background or starting point.
So it's not just about individual striving.
Yeah.
It's about creating a system that provides opportunities for everyone to reach their full potential.
Exactly. It's about balancing individual initiative with a commitment to fairness and social mobility.
You know, one thing that strikes me about this whole conversation is that the PragerU video seems to equate economic growth with progress.
Yeah.
But shouldn't we also be thinking about the quality of that growth?
Absolutely.
The impact it has on the environment, and whether the benefits are being shared equitably.
It's not just about how much we produce,
right,
but how we produce it.
Right.
The impact it has on the planet, and how those benefits are distributed.
So, like, we could have an economy that's growing gangbusters.
Yeah.
But if it's destroying the environment, leaving millions behind, and creating massive inequality, is that really progress?
That's a great question, and one that's increasingly being asked by economists, policymakers, and citizens around the world.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our focus from purely quantitative measures of economic growth to qualitative measures of well-being, sustainability, and social justice.
So maybe true progress isn't just about bigger GDP numbers.
Right.
But about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a healthy, fulfilling, and meaningful life.
Yes.
In harmony with each other and the planet.
That's a beautiful vision, and one that I think many people would aspire to.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need to think beyond narrow economic indicators.
Yeah.
And consider the broader social and environmental impacts of our choices.
Okay, so we've talked about individual responsibility, the role of government, and the importance of considering factors beyond pure economic growth.
Right.
Another argument the video made was about the supposed superiority of competition in driving innovation and progress.
Yeah.
They praised the free market as this engine of creativity and efficiency. But aren't there also benefits to cooperation and collaboration?
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to tackling complex global challenges.
While competition can certainly drive innovation and efficiency, it can also lead to cutthroat practices, exploitation, and a focus on short-term gains over long-term sustainability.
Okay.
Cooperation, on the other hand, allows for the sharing of knowledge, resources, and expertise.
Right.
Which can be particularly valuable in addressing complex issues like climate change, global pandemics, and poverty.
It seems like finding the right balance between competition and cooperation is key to fostering both economic dynamism and social progress.
Indeed. It's about recognizing that both approaches have their strengths and limitations.
Yeah.
And finding ways to leverage them effectively.
The video really frames capitalism and socialism as these opposing forces. Locked in an internal struggle.
Right.
But is that really an accurate representation of the complexities of economic systems?
It's a common narrative, but it often oversimplifies a nuanced and multifaceted reality.
Yeah.
In practice, many countries have adopted hybrid models that blend elements of both capitalism and socialism to varying degrees.
So it's not about choosing one system over another. It's about finding the right mix of policies and approaches to create a system that works for a particular society and its values.
Precisely. It's about pragmatism, experimentation, and a willingness to adapt and evolve based on experience and changing circumstances.
This is all making me think that maybe the real question isn't capitalism versus socialism.
Right.
Or rather, what kind of world do we want to live in?
Yeah.
What values do we prioritize? And how can we create economic systems that reflect those values and help us achieve our goals?
You're absolutely right. It's about moving beyond ideological debates.
Yeah.
And engaging in a more constructive dialogue about how to create a world that is both prosperous, and just both innovative and compassionate.
All right, so we've unpacked a lot of the video's main points.
Yes.
But there's still a few things I want to touch on.
Okay.
They brought up the economic success of the U.S., attributing it to capitalist principles.
Okay.
But let's be honest, the U.S. also has its fair share of problems.
Yep.
Wealth inequality, a struggling healthcare system, and a history of racial and social injustice.
Yeah.
Doesn't that complicate their argument a bit?
Absolutely. It's crucial to acknowledge both the strengths and weaknesses of any economic system.
Okay.
While the U.S. has achieved a high level of overall wealth,
Right.
it also faces challenges related to inequality access to essential services
Yeah.
and systemic biases that have historically disadvantaged certain groups.
So it's not just about the size of the economic pie.
Right.
It's about how it's sliced.
Yeah.
And whether everyone has a fair chance to share in the prosperity.
Exactly. Economic justice, social mobility, and equal opportunity are essential considerations alongside purely economic metrics.
The video praised the role of the free market in allocating resources efficiently. But are markets really always that efficient?
Well,
Don't they sometimes fail to account for things like environmental costs or the well-being of workers?
that's where the limitations of a purely market-driven approach become apparent. Markets are not always perfect,
Right.
and they can sometimes fail to account for the full costs and benefits of certain actions.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure, think about pollution.
Okay.
A factory might pollute a river to reduce its production costs,
Right.
but the costs of that pollution are borne by the community and the environment, not the factory itself.
Okay.
That's an example of an externality, a cost or benefit that's not reflected in the market price.
So the market might incentivize behavior that's ultimately harmful to society or the environment if left unchecked.
Exactly, and that's where government regulations, social responsibility, and ethical considerations come into play.
Okay.
We need to find ways to align market incentives with broader societal goals and ensure that the costs of economic activity are properly accounted for.
The video also seemed to suggest that people who advocate for socialist policies are naive or idealistic,
Yeah.
out of touch with the realities of economics.
Okay.
But isn't it also naive to assume that the current economic system is perfect and that there's no room for improvement?
That's a great point. It's important to approach these discussions with a healthy dose of skepticism,
Right.
but also a willingness to question assumptions.
Yeah.
Explore new ideas and imagine alternative possibilities.
It's about recognizing that no system is perfect, that there are always trade-offs and unintended consequences,
Right.
and that we need to constantly evaluate and adapt our approaches based on experience and changing circumstances.
Exactly. It's about embracing a spirit of inquiry, experimentation, and continuous improvement.
The video celebrates the dynamism and innovation of capitalism.
Yeah.
They make it seem like socialism is all about government control and stifling creativity. But couldn't a well-designed socialist system also encourage creativity and progress?
Sure.
Maybe by focusing on collaboration and shared knowledge rather than individual competition?
That's an intriguing possibility. While capitalism often rewards individual initiative and competition, socialist systems could potentially create environments where collaboration, knowledge sharing, and collective problem solving are prioritized.
Imagine a system where scientific discoveries and technological advancements are shared freely,
Right.
rather than being guarded as trade secrets or patented for profit. That could lead to rapid progress in areas like medicine, renewable energy, and sustainable agriculture.
It's a fascinating thought experiment. It highlights the potential for different economic systems to foster innovation in diverse ways.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual genius,
Right.
but about creating systems that support collective learning and knowledge sharing.
Okay, so we're starting to see that this whole debate is about more than just capitalism versus socialism.
Right.
It's about understanding the complexities of economic systems,
Yeah.
the role of government, the importance of social responsibility,
Right.
and the need to consider the broader impacts of economic activity on society and the environment.
Yes.
But if we're going to move beyond this simplistic framing, what are some of the key questions we should be asking?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important questions is, what is the purpose of an economic system? Is it simply to generate wealth?
Okay.
Or is it to create a society that is just equitable and sustainable?
And if it's the latter, then we need to be asking, how can we design economic systems that promote those values?
Right.
How can we balance individual freedom with collective well-being? How can we harness the power of markets?
Yeah.
while also mitigating their potential negative impacts?
Those are all crucial questions, and I think the answers will vary depending on the specific context of a given society.
Right.
What works in one country might not work in another.
Right.
But the key is to be willing to experiment,
Yeah.
to learn from both successes and failures, and to constantly strive for improvement.
So it's not about finding the perfect system,
Right.
but about constantly adapting and evolving to meet the challenges of our time.
Exactly. And that requires open minds, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
The video really hammered home this idea that socialism leads to economic stagnation and decline.
Mm-hmm.
But haven't there been examples of socialist countries that have achieved significant economic growth and improved living standards for their citizens?
You're absolutely right. It's important to acknowledge the diversity of experiences among countries that have adopted socialist policies.
Okay.
While some have struggled with the economic challenges,
Right.
others have achieved notable successes in areas like healthcare education and social welfare.
So it's not about the inherent nature of the system itself,
Right.
but about how it's implemented,
Yeah.
the specific policies adopted,
Mm-hmm.
and the context of the country in question.
Precisely. It's about learning from both successes and failures, adapting approaches based on evidence, and recognizing the complexities of economic development.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the nuances of this debate.
Yeah.
It's not just about capitalism versus socialism.
Right.
It's about understanding the full spectrum of economic systems and finding the right balance for a given society and its values.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What works in one country might not work in another.
Yeah.
The key is to engage in thoughtful dialogue, consider a range of perspectives, and critically evaluate the potential consequences of different economic approaches.
You know, the video made a big deal about the importance of individual responsibility in a capitalist society.
Huh.
But they didn't really talk about the responsibility of corporations and wealthy individuals.
Right.
Shouldn't they also have a role to play in contributing to the well-being of society?
That's an essential consideration. The concept of individual responsibility often emphasizes personal initiative and self-reliance.
Right.
However, it's important to acknowledge the interconnected nature of society
Yeah.
and the role of collective action in addressing shared challenges.
Right. Corporations benefit from a stable society, a healthy workforce, and a well-maintained infrastructure.
Yeah.
And wealthy individuals often accumulate their wealth through the efforts of many others,
Right.
as well as the opportunities and resources provided by society.
Ah.
So it seems reasonable to expect them to contribute their fair share to the common good.
Absolutely. It's about finding a balance between individual initiative and social responsibility.
Okay.
Corporations and wealthy individuals have a responsibility to use their resources and influence in ways that benefit society as a whole,
Yeah.
not just their own bottom line.
I'm also thinking about the video's emphasis on economic growth as the ultimate measure of progress.
Yeah.
But what about the environmental and social costs of unchecked growth?
Uh-huh.
Shouldn't we be factoring those into the equation?
That's a crucial question that's often overlooked in purely economic discussions. The pursuit of endless economic growth can lead to environmental degradation, resource depletion, and social inequality if not carefully managed.
So it's not just about how much we produce,
Right.
but how we produce it,
Right.
the impact it has on the planet, and how the benefits are distributed.
You've got it. It's about shifting our focus from purely quantitative measures of economic growth
Right.
to qualitative measures of well-being, sustainability, and social justice.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Is there anything else from the video we should touch on before we wrap up?
Well, they brought up the idea that socialist policies disincentivize innovation and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
They argue that people are less likely to take risks and start businesses
Yeah.
if they know the government will provide for their basic needs.
But couldn't you argue that a well-designed socialist system could actually encourage entrepreneurship
Sure.
by providing a safety net that allows people to pursue their passions without fear of financial ruin?
That's an interesting perspective. Imagine a system where everyone has access to basic necessities, like healthcare, education, and housing,
Okay.
freeing them to pursue their creative endeavors and entrepreneurial ambitions without the fear of falling into poverty.
It seems like that kind of security could actually foster more innovation,
Yeah.
as people would be more willing to take risks and try new things,
Right.
knowing that they have a safety net to fall back on if things don't work out.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where failure is not a catastrophe,
Yeah.
but a learning opportunity.
Right.
And it highlights the potential for different economic systems to foster innovation in unique ways.
Okay, so it seems like we've pretty thoroughly dissected this PragerU video.
We have.
And explored a lot of the key arguments in the capitalism versus socialism debate.
Right.
But where do we go from here?
I think the most important thing is to continue the conversation, to keep asking questions, to be open to new ideas, and to challenge our own assumptions.
Because ultimately, it's not about clinging to rigid ideologies.
It's about finding the best solutions to the challenges we face and creating a world that works for everyone.
Okay, so let's wrap things up.
Sounds good.
You've helped us unpack this video.
Yeah.
And I think we've gained a much deeper understanding of the complexities of this debate. Okay. So we've talked about this PragerU video and kind of like some of the key arguments it makes about capitalism and socialism.
Right.
And it's given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But as we've discussed, it's really important to consider those different perspectives, to kind of delve into the nuances and to challenge those simple either-or framings.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's the key takeaway here.
Yeah.
This isn't a black and white capitalism versus socialism debate.
Right.
It's about finding the right balance, the right mix of policies and approaches to create a society that is both prosperous and just.
Yeah.
Both innovative and compassionate.
And that balance might look different in different contexts.
Right.
Depending on the specific challenges and opportunities facing a particular society.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
But the most important thing is to have these conversations, to listen to diverse perspectives, and to be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
The PragerU video presented a particular viewpoint, a very pro-capitalist one. And they made some interesting points.
Yeah.
But it's up to each of us to kind of critically evaluate those points.
Right.
To do our own research and to form our own conclusions.
I completely agree.
Don't just take our word for it or the video's word for it.
Yeah.
Go out there and explore the vast landscape of economic thought.
Yeah.
The history of different systems and the ongoing debates about how to create a better future.
Because at the end of the day, economic systems are tools.
Yes.
They're frameworks we create to organize our societies and meet our needs.
And the real question is, what kind of society do we want to create?
Yeah.
Well, what values do we prioritize? And how can we use these tools to build a world that reflects those values?
That's a great way to put it. It's not about ideology.
Right.
It's about finding the best solutions to the challenges we face.
Right.
Whether those challenges are economic, social, or environmental.
And those solutions